They say that history tends to be written by the winners, or at the very least, it's all about the important people, the kings, the queens and the generals. But what about the ordinary folk, our ancestors, and the way that they lived? Well, a couple of weeks ago, we covered the launch of Scotland's Rural Past, and that's an initiative aimed at rediscovering our past and our lost landscapes. This is Strathconon, and at first sight it's a typical Highland glen. There's a bit of forestry, a bit of agriculture and a vast area for sport. But what you're looking at is a relatively new landscape, and if you take a closer look you can catch just a glimpse of a lost world.
I was out for a walk one day and came over the hill, and there's this big hole, which is the actual kiln bit. You took a walk over the nice fertile bit, and there was lots of remains of lots of buildings. It looks as though there's 3 discrete settlements here, which means maybe 3 families. But a family then was very much extended.
Living in one of these buildings must have been primitive. You're living side by side with your animals, you've got the giant hanging lum in the centre of the room, and I suppose you could say it's got its own unique atmosphere.
This is our first call, really. It's our first project that we're getting involved in. This is very much a chance for us to see on the ground the kind of material that we'll be dealing with over the next 5 years, and the type of volunteers who we'll be dealing with, and their level of interest.
Just now we're sort of pacing the site, sort of trying to fill the field boundaries to get an idea of how large it is, having a look at buildings when we find them, and thinking amongst ourselves about how we can suggest volunteers actually interpret this site.
Early Ordnance Survey maps verify the existence of these villages or shielings, but there's often no other documentation or records. And now the link to these communities is worn so thin that they're unknown to those living there now.
The slightly strange thing about the fields that we see here is that there's no obvious rig running through them.
How do you mean rig?
Rig and furrow.
Oh, I see.
Cultivation furrows.
Right.
So perhaps that's occurred slightly further.
We didn't realise it was so vast, and we didn't realise there was so many different parts of it, i.e. from what they're now saying is a corn kiln, possibly a lime kiln. As the landscape in the Highlands is changing with various different things that's going on in the Highlands now, I think the certainty it is it should be looked after for future generations. And it's a big part of what we do in the estate here. We're custodians of these lands, and we should be looking after what we have.
We've now come much further up the glen to yet another site, and you can clearly see the remains of the stone cottages. This was the settlement of Blarnaby and was one of the many Highland villages affected by the clearances.
The reporter from the Inverness Courier came to describe the clearance in 1850. When he came here, I think there were still 58 people living in very poor conditions.
But it wasn't just the clearances that emptied the land. Agricultural and industrial revolutions meant that folk were drawn to find work in the cities and on the bigger farms.
I find these places fascinating because you can actually feel how the ordinary people lived. You can see all the little nooks and crannies that these people lived in and the children played in. These people were self-sufficient in a way that we aren't self-sufficient anymore. They had their own way of living, which has gone to a great extent.
When you consider that 250 years ago, 80% of Scotland's population worked on the land, then the significance of these villages and clachans becomes all too apparent. And these sites hold vital information on social history and land use and show us just where and how our forebears lived.